Thank you for tuning into another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and as always, joined with two amazing guests as we are going to look ahead at some Week 13 matchups and rankings. Today, I have two guys from Yahoo, Andy Behrens and Dan Titus, as we are going to look ahead at some of these really big matchups and what to possibly expect. Can you get worried about Isaiah Pacheco now that Melvin Gordon is in Kansas City? Is it time for Jordan Love to take over for the Green Bay Packers? Are you starting Tua on a tough road matchup? And so much more. Stick through to the very end. This is a great episode filled with laughs and good information. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Launchpad. With Melvin Gordon in Kansas City, can you still start Isaiah Pacheco? That and so much more on today's episode of The Launchpad. Andy, go ahead and start us off here. Are we still looking at Isaiah Pacheco as a potential starter in fantasy this week?
I mean, Melvin Gordon was a punchline for most of you like a minute ago, and now he's some huge threat to Isaiah Pacheco. No, I think he's a really nice reclamation project for a team that doesn't desperately need anything right now. But no, I don't think Gordon is an immediate threat to a rookie with a ton of talent. Coming off a string of strong games. I think the Gordon addition probably tells you something about CEH, a little something about Ronald Jones, but it says almost nothing at all about Pacheco.
And I think you nailed it right there. And do you think that they would have even made an effort to sign Melvin Gordon if CEH wasn't injured?
No, I doubt they would have. Again, I thought like Melvin was actually like kind of quietly great last year. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable flyer for a team to take. And I, this is a little bit of a rich get richer situation if Gordon actually, returns to the dude that he was last year and has been for most of his career. But I think this is almost entirely about the Edwards-Helaire injury.
And you are echoing exactly what I said in our newsletter just a couple days ago. And it's something that I want to talk about because Isaiah Pacheco has been great for the last couple of weeks. And I think some people are getting a little bit nervous because they see Melvin Gordon, an RB1 for multiple years with the Chargers and former first-round pick, but he just isn't the player that he used to be. So I'm with you there. Dan, do you have anything to add here? I mean, are you still looking at Pacheco as a starter, or are you maybe getting a little bit concerned about Gordon?
No, I'm not concerned at all. I think it's a far cry that Melvin Gordon is going to return to RB1 status, but Isaiah Pacheco is the leader of this backfield now. He commanded 85% of the carries last week, three straight games of 15 plus carries and 60 plus yards. I don't think that Melvin Gordon is going to factor in much here. Now, the one thing I will note is that Jerick McKinnon didn't practice today, so there's a chance that Melvin Gordon might find himself some opportunities in the pass game, but this is Pacheco's backfield, so I wouldn't be concerned if I'm a Pacheco manager right now.
Yeah, and looking at this whole backfield, I mean, Jerick McKinnon is the only guy that is a talented pass catcher. We haven't seen Pacheco do it yet. Melvin Gordon, he's got some skill in the passing game, but we haven't seen it over, any sort of stretch. And then Ronald Jones just has brick for hands. So if Jerick McKinnon can't play for whatever reason, I don't know who the pass catching guy is going to be. We might see Sky Moore lining up in the backfield on third downs. I don't really know what to expect if McKinnon can't make it this week, but I think we're all on agreement here. Isaiah Pacheco is the guy. He has been getting a lot of faith from Andy Reid lately, and got to love that and just keep riding the hot hand as we approach fantasy playoffs here. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in to what is now episode 55 of The Launchpad. I took off last week for the holidays, got to spend some time with my family, which is nice. But the week before that, I was with Joe Dolan and Jordan Vanek as we were talking about some week 11 matchups. And now joined with two guys from Yahoo, Andy Behrens and Dan Titus. And we are going to talk about some week 13 matchups. Before we get into it, Andy, let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you're working on this season.
They can find me on Twitter for however long that thing lasts, at Andy Behrens. I'm happy to interact with folks, answer sit-start questions, whatnot. You're not going to get a lot of analysis from me there because that stuff can be found on Yahoo, the people that actually pay me. Every week we got Fantasy Football Live on Sunday mornings, an hour before kickoff. So check that out. Check out the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast as well.
So when Twitter dies, where can we find you? Do you have an Instagram or an OnlyFans or anything else you want to
plug? well, OnlyFans hasn't reached out to me. I mean, I guess I'd be willing to talk to them, but beyond that, you can just find me like at a bar. There's
good to know. North side of Chicago, just walk into a bar, yell Andy, and hopefully you'll be able to find him there. But Dan, newly over at Yahoo, you and I connected years ago. We started working at Fantasy Pros together, and it's awesome seeing you raise through the industry now over at Yahoo doing your thing. But let everyone know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, similar to Andy. Find me on Twitter at Dan Titus. But great to see you again, Dave. You just briefly shared the story, but we go way back in the news desk days of Fantasy Pros, and it's been great to see you rise, man. Love the show. Love the intro of the Launchpad. It always gets me hyped to watch. So, and then joining Andy here, my colleague at Yahoo. Always great to talk football with Andy. So, yeah, you can find me at a bar too, but a little bit less these days. Do have a little one, so I don't get out as much, but still love to get out there when I can.
Awesome. Well, we got a ton of awesome things to talk about today. Some really fun games this week that I am excited about. Before we get into that, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys if you have not already. In addition to this show, we've got short videos coming at you every single day on the YouTube. You can find the Audible, the Dynasty newsletter show, the mailbag show, and so much more. youtube.com/footballguys. Now let's go ahead and jump into this game, which we already talked about a little bit. Kansas City Chiefs is currently 9-2, facing off against the Cincinnati Bengals at 7-4. We might be looking at some sort of AFC playoff preview here. So all eyes are going to be on this game. Should be a ton of fun. Now, it looks like Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be healthy this week. He returned to practice, but no guarantee yet. But let's just say, outside of Juju Smith-Schuster, Dan, you can start us off here. Are there any other wide receivers in Kansas City that you can start in your fantasy lineup?
I can't. I tried to pull Sky Moore in there, last week, but like even that didn't really work out too well. It's really hard for me to trust anyone outside of Juju, even though he only saw an 8% target share last week. If you just look at the way the Chiefs are playing, they're gonna Justin Watson led them in snap share last week. So like it's just hard to predict who's gonna go off besides Kelsey. I mean, this offense runs through him. But I'd really be concerned because, are you really going to trot out MVS right now? Like I know he leads the team in ADOT and yards per reception, but in what projects to be a high scoring matchup, I don't know. I feel like this is going to be one of those Kelsey games. And you might remember that the Chiefs had double-digit leads against the Bengals in the last two matchups and completely blew it. So I think this is going to be one of those games that the Chiefs are certainly going to try to enact their will, control the clock, which I think, maybe presents a problem for the other pass catchers for the Chiefs if they can't get going outside of Kelsey and Juju.
Yeah, this feels like a game where you can actually move Isaiah Pacheco a little bit higher than we have in previous weeks. I'm with you. I think that they do commit to the run game a little bit more. And then MVS, man, I mean, they gave him a lot of money, but unless you're in a league that rewards drops and air yards, you're probably not starting him anywhere either. So, Andy, talk to us a little bit. Is there anybody, maybe Sky Moore? It doesn't look like Kadarius Toney's playing, but is there anybody besides Juju that piques your interest?
So listen, I get it. You're in a league with 10 teams. You're in a league with 12 teams. You're probably not starting these guys, but a league with depth greater than that, these guys are Chiefs receivers. They are catching passes from Patrick Mahomes, and they're going to have some value, whether we call him a flex, whether we call him a wide receiver 3. Like I guarantee you that at some point this season there is going to be a spike game for MVS. He is going to have a day. Dan mentioned it. He's averaging 16 and a half yards per catch right now. His ADOT is almost 13 yards. Only one touchdown on the season just feels kind of fluky, right? Like he's getting high yield opportunities from Patrick Mahomes. And at some point that's going to result in a multi-touchdown game. It's annoying because it's going to happen like in a week when you don't see it coming, right? He's almost, we almost shouldn't consider a matchup with MVS, right? He's like a deep shot guy. I think he's going to have a week at some point down the road. Like he's like I don't know, there's a horribly insulting thing to say, but in some ways he's like a poor man's Will Fuller, right? When Will Fuller was a thing. He's just a guy that you park in a wide receiver 3 spot. And you know that a couple times a year, he has the potential to be a week winner. I don't know that it's going to happen this week, but I feel pretty sure that it's going to happen at some point. And then Sky Moore has seen, 6 targets again from Patrick Mahomes in each of the last 2 games, and that has value somewhere.
Yeah, and it's such a cliche, but Marquez Valdes-Scantling is one of those perfect guys that you want for best ball because you can never really trust him in your lineup because of the wide range of outcomes every single week. But when he does have those spike weeks, so if you haven't already, be sure to sign up at Underdog using promo code Footballguys for a 100% deposit match. Got to get that plug in there. But let's go ahead and talk about the Bengals as well in this matchup. And the guy I want to talk about is Jamar Chase. And I think we're all going to kind of be on the same page here, but I think this is a good conversation to have for people that are listening. Coming back from a hip injury, hasn't played in a few weeks. I think some people are a little bit nervous about plugging him in your lineup. So, Dan, start us off here. Who are some guys that you're ranking ahead of him? I mean, are we looking at this guy as a top 3 option like he was pre-injury, or is he more kind of a wide receiver 2 this week?
Yeah, I don't know that I can rank him that high. I mean, I'm going to give him top 10 status just off the strength of the fact that he's had 2 crazy good games against the Chiefs in the past. You know, obviously the record-setting day of 230 plus yards and 3 touchdowns. But, you know, at this point, I still rank T. Higgins ahead of him. Now, the Bengals are still running a lot of 11 personnel. They're one of the tops in the league of that. So he's going to be on the field. I'd just be a little bit concerned of Chase having some kind of a snap count because he had a hip injury. And, you know, I think that there's plenty of other wide receivers that I think will have spike weeks, like Amon-Ra St. Brown. I have him ahead of him. Jalen Waddle, I still think, even though going against the San Francisco 49ers, he's still going to be a yak monster there. So, you know, I think that you can still place him in the top 10. You got to start Chase anytime he's healthy, but I would temper expectations a little bit and think that T. Higgins could actually be the benefactor of Chase going back into the lineup, at least in the short term.
Agree. And I mean, T. Higgins has looked like he's looked phenomenal the last couple of weeks without Jamar Chase, and having him there to pull some coverage could help him even more. And Andy, I'm guessing you're kind of on the same page, unless somehow you have 3 top 10 wide receivers. Like, unless you're sitting with Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown,
Right.
You're probably just plugging Jamar Chase into your lineup, right?
Yeah, we've already mentioned most of the guys that I have ranked ahead of Chase this week. And this is one of those things where, like, you know, we all sort of play the rankings game. And so we have to think about whether we've got a guy slotted as a wide receiver too. Is he a top 10 guy? Is he a top 15 guy? But as a practical matter, if you've got Jamar Chase on a roster, you are absolutely playing him. Like, nobody's got the roster outside of, like, I don't know, 4-team, 6-team family league or something like that, where they can sit Jamar Chase. It's just absolutely not happening. Dan mentioned it in his last 2 games against Kansas City, one in the playoffs, one in the regular season, 320 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns.
Crazy.
Like he's freaking Jamar Chase, and we're not setting him to the bench. It's just absolutely not happening. Not thinking twice about it.
And you
so
know,
again,
I knew
just kind of irrelevant where you rank him.
Right. And I knew you smart gentlemen would answer just like that. And this is a conversation for people that are listening that might have a little bit of concern about him possibly coming back. The one last thing I'll say about Jamar Chase is that they said that he could have played last week. So he might not even be on a snap count this week. I mean, he could have gone out there last week if need be. So he's probably pretty darn close to 100% this week. Just put him in your lineup.
You know, one thing I'll add is oftentimes when players are on, especially great players, when they're on snap counts returning, like once the bullets start flying and they're in a game, and this is a competitive game against Kansas City, that stuff goes out the window. So like it takes a lot of discipline for a coach to actually stick to a snap count for a player like Jamar Chase. Plus, if his snap count is like 30, that certainly doesn't preclude him from seeing 10 targets.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about Keenan Allen, who was supposed to be eased back into his role coming off the hamstring injury. Played 70% of the snaps 2 weeks ago, played over 90% of the snaps last week. He's going to get out there. I'm not too concerned about it. So again, this was a conversation for the audience. Start Jamar Chase. Don't worry about it whatsoever. Last thing I want to talk about in this matchup, though, we already talked about T. Higgins a little bit. He is a smash start as well. But I think that we need to start paying a little bit closer attention to Hayden Hurst, who has quietly given us a pretty strong season from the tight end status. So, Andy, I'm just going to ask you, I mean, set him and forget him tight ends. They are pretty rare, but has Hayden Hurst worked his way into maybe the very last slot in that set him and forget him tier?
I guess I would argue that this is such a dreadful position that they're all just set it and forget it tight ends, right? Like, I don't even want to think about it. You know, there's like 4 good ones for fantasy, right? And one of those guys is really just a left tackle who gets to run around a little bit, right? Like that's George Kittle, and then there's Hawkinson, and then there's Andrews, and then there's Kelsey, and then we're done.
There's Goddard and Ertz who are out for the season.
Who are out, yeah,
Right.
yeah. So it's just kind of Waller, and it's just kind of a set it and forget it position for me. Like, if you're chasing last week's breakout tight end, you're almost certainly guaranteeing yourself like a 2-catch, 24-yard performance, right? Like if you're chasing whichever Colt just scored, he is definitely not going to score in the upcoming week. So like at some point we're just playing Hayden Hurst. I mean, he's probably going to see a half dozen Joe Burrow targets. That is a pretty good way to make a living. He has almost no path to, finishing inside the top 3 at the position for the year, but he can score in any given week. And the floor here is probably still like 50 receiving yards. So that's fine. Again, terrible position.
Yeah, I feel like you're just mocking me at this point because since losing Zach Ertz in my home league, I put in Cole Kmet 2 weeks ago, who gave me nothing. I put in Greg Dulcich last week, who gave me nothing. I am chasing whoever is coming off the big week, and you're nailing it. It's just 2 catches for 20 yards. That's what you get after a big tight end performance. So, Dan, we'll wrap up with this game, but just let me know if you've got any notes that you'd like to plug about Hayden Hurst.
So, man, if you're having to start Hayden Hurst, it's definitely brutal for you. And as the cycle
I am
that you
starting Hayden Hurst. Come on, man.
the cycle that you just went through, it's the Cole Kmets, the Greg Dulciches. It's bad out there, man. I don't know that I can say he's a set it and forget it. I think this week, actually, even though he's coming off a successful week, I actually think this one might be a decent matchup for him if you're going to stream him. The Chiefs are allowing 43 yards to the tight end position. They're middle of the pack. And what, as I said before, what projects, this implied totals over 50. This could be a firework type game. So if you're going to start him, this will probably be it. But man, I'd probably be looking at like Foster Moreau. I think I prefer him. Even Evan Ingram this week in Detroit. And I think that's another game that I think I'd be targeting because there's going to be a lot of fantasy points to be had because Detroit can't guard anyone. Their defense is atrocious. So, I think maybe those two guys maybe present better options if you don't want to take the leap on Hayden Hurst.
I thought I was the last Evan Ingram apologist out there, so that's
There's
awesome.
still one. There's still one out here.
All three of us. We have three
it's
Evan
just
Ingram
a
fans on the
matchup.
show. I don't think this has ever happened since his rookie season that three Evan Ingram fans are recording the show together. But Andy, I hope you're ready for it, man. We're going to be talking about tight ends on every single matchup today, just because I know how much you love talking about them. And I know you and Chris Harris both have the same stance. I had Chris Harris come on a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned tight ends, and he goes, doesn't matter. Just put one in your lineup. Unless you've got Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce, none of them matter. So we'll try to avoid some of the tight end talk for the rest of the show.
It was funny. Real quick, just going back, Andy just had a great 2-minute drill about why we should just eliminate the tight end position. And like, he's totally right, because it's Travis Kelce and there's everyone else. And at this point, I know we'll talk about a couple more tight ends, but like, yeah, this position is just a wasteland now this year. It's awful.
And I will say the other thing about it. The other thing about it is that, and I think Chris would echo this point as well, that the guys that we're actually starting in fantasy at tight end are just big wide receivers. That is all they are. They spend all of their time in the slot or out wide. They spend very little time in line. Like Alan Lazard, Cooper Kupp spend about as much time in line as a lot of the tight ends that we're starting in fantasy. So like my thing is we should just blend it in with wide receivers.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad take whatsoever. And that's why you got the tight end premium leagues, which are supposed to level it a little bit, but then you just end up getting 50, 60 points a week from Travis Kelce. And then that's the cheat code.
It literally just means that instead of Travis Kelce having twice the number of points of like the number 4 tight end, he now has 4 times as many points as the number 4 tight end. So that great job, leveler.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you guys saw Underdog just published with the best ball advancement rates, and they did the exposure from the top 25 teams right now. Travis Kelce is on almost 80% of those rosters. Like if you took Travis Kelce, that's it. I mean, you're doing well in your league because you drafted Kelce. I mean, there's going to be a realistic conversation next year about him being the 101 in drafts because he just gives you such an absurd advantage. But let's go ahead and talk about our sleeper starts of the week. We do this every single week. If you're not playing on Sleeper by now, I don't know what you're doing. It's a great platform. 22 new features this year that you should be sure to check out. And you can find the download app in the YouTube description below.
It's time for the Sleeper Start of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
Let's go ahead and get into this. Dan, who is your Sleeper of the Week?
Yeah, I kind of teased it talking about the Detroit Lions and the Jacksonville Jaguars here, but I'm riding with Zay Jones. I think he's a legitimate start this week in your flex position if you have it, if you're starting 3 wide receivers. He's got at least 8 targets in the last 2 games, and obviously coming off a monster week, 11 receptions. I think he's going to be the Trevor Lawrence target here. It's him and it's Christian Kirk, and they're going to be throwing all over this Detroit secondary. So I think you can actually start him with confidence this week.
Love that call out. And I know our Sigmund Bloom just plugged him in our waiver short this week as his number 1 priority on the waiver wire if he's still available. I feel like the 3 of us all have these like kind of really weird niche players that we all like. Because Zay Jones is a guy I've been beating the drum for years. And here you are coming on my show, pumping up Zay Jones. I love it, Titus. Thank you so much. Andy, who is the guy that you are going to tag as your sleeper of the week?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm pandering to you here or not, but you cannot sit George Pickens, not this week, not against Atlanta. That's a defense that ranks number 28 against the pass on the season, that allows the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers and the 2nd most receiving yards to opposing wide receivers. Pickens, obviously unreal. He's a highlight machine. He's got size, speed, strength, body control, hands, all the stuff that you're looking for. The passer rating on throws to George Pickens this season in Pittsburgh is 100.2. which you guys would probably guess that compares favorably to the passer rating of Steelers quarterbacks on any other throw. Pickens is definitely giving us a top 20 week at the position here.
Yeah, agree with that completely. And, I think that opens up a really fun discussion too, just kind of talking about these rookie wide receivers. This class has been absolutely insane. I mean, George Pickens, for as great as he is, I don't think that you can even put him higher than the wide receiver 3 in this class with what Olave has done and what we're seeing now, with Garrett Wilson. I mean, this class is absolutely unbelievable. And Pickens is one of those weird guys where people that watch the game and, like to study film love George Pickens. But then if you look at the metrics purely from an analytics basis, everybody's screaming that you need to sell George Pickens. I'm kind of in the camp that I just think he is a really good player. I don't care if he didn't get the draft capital. I don't care if he's coming off an injury, whatever it may be. He is a phenomenal player. He passes the eye test with flying colors. George Pickens is a fun guy to watch. And Andy, both of us being Bears fans, I mean, we're going to be hearing about it for quite a while that we passed on George Pickens twice.
V-less.
It was brutal. I mean, we had 2 second-round picks on the board both times, and we ended up not getting him. So that's going to haunt us every single time I see him make one of these crazy acrobatic catches. Anyway,
yeah, but we won the Chase Claypool sweepstakes. So come on.
All right, on to the next question. I can't talk about this anymore.
real quick though, what do you guys think of the outlook of Deontay Johnson is with George Pickens emerging here? Because we already know he was stone hands before, but I feel like he's replacing him a little bit as the wide receiver 1. So rest of the season, I'd actually like Pickens more than Deontay.
Yep. And, I'm thinking that you guys studied up on some of my content this week before coming on my show because you're just talking about all my guys. And in my article this week, I just wrote about Deontay Johnson as a trending down player. And let me just rattle off a couple numbers real quickly here. I mean, obviously, we know that the volume is what really supported him during his time with Ben Roethlisberger. 10.1 targets per game, 62.3% catch rate. And then to start this season with Mitch Trubisky, he was seeing 11 targets per game, 62% catch rate, almost the same exact usage and efficiency that he was seeing with Ben Roethlisberger. But since Kenny Pickett has taken over, it has been really bad. 7.6 targets per game, 57% catch rate. His ADOT has spiked dramatically. They're just using him so much differently. He's now suddenly this downfield guy, but he isn't getting any yards after the catch. His catch rate has plummeted. I'm with you. I think Pickens has usurped Deontay Johnson as the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh ever since Kenny Pickett took over.
Man, those are the stats I need to hear. So I will be benching Deontay for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I've got him benched in a couple of my leagues. Deontay was a guy that I targeted a lot this year.
Yeah.
And looking like a little bit of a bust so far. Since week 4, when they made that quarterback change, George Pickens is the wide receiver 25 in PPR scoring. Deontay Johnson is the wide receiver 49. So yeah, things are looking pretty bleak for DJ. The one
I do just want to say
he has 0 touchdowns.
I do just want to say Deontay's really good. Deontay is open off the snap of the football almost all the time. So I do think that his fantasy value moving forward is really going to be tied to the development of Kenny Pickett, but I don't want to make it seem like Deontay was just a function of Ben Roethlisberger not pushing the ball downfield or anything like that. I think Deontay is gifted in a really, really important way. I don't know that will help him fantasy wise over the balance of the season. I'd probably rather just have George Pickens who can make these, Moss level catches downfield. So yeah, Pickens in any given week is more likely to find the end zone.
So the other weird thing, and the last thing I'll say about Deontay Johnson, and I've noticed this watching the game, is I think the chemistry that he had with Ben Roethlisberger just led to so many yards after the catch. He'd put the ball right out in front of him. Deontay Johnson in stride would just be able to keep going. And now he's just kind of this catch and fall receiver because he doesn't have that chemistry and he's not getting those pinpoint targets anymore. And it shows in the numbers as well. His yards after catch per reception are at a career low 2. I mean, he's averaging 2 yards after the catch this year, where that used to be where he'd accumulate a lot of his points. So I'm with you. I think Deontay Johnson is a fantastic player. I just think that in this offense, he's struggling to get the usage that made him so valuable in years past. So wouldn't surprise me if he ends up getting traded this season. They've got him on one more pretty team-friendly year on that contract. So it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up getting moved this offseason, but we'll see what happens there. Let's go ahead and move on, though. And I want to talk about the New York Jets at the Minnesota Vikings, another game with 2 teams that are heading for the playoffs. The New York Jets have been something. I mean, they are fun to watch this year, and we'll talk about them. Let's start off with the Minnesota Vikings, and of course, we're going to talk about tight ends. And Andy, you could start us off here. TJ Hawkinson, is he a top 3 tight end? I mean, I think he is absolutely in the set him and forget him tier, but since coming to Minnesota, I think you can make an argument that he's top 3 behind Kelsey and Andrews.
Yeah, you don't even really have to make the argument because he is literally the number 3 tight end in Yahoo default scoring right now. Like that is where he is on the season, and I can see no reason why he wouldn't finish there. He's like, we don't see this very often at tight end where there's like a mid-season trade that really helps somebody's value. He's seeing like 2.5 additional targets per game with Minnesota above and beyond what he was seeing in Detroit, and his volume was fine in Detroit. It was like 6 targets a game, but now it's really jumped. He's second at the position in red zone targets over the last 4 weeks during his time in Minnesota. He's got 8 red zone targets, so he's seeing the ball in the right area of the field. He's seeing the ball a lot. It is a productive offense. So yeah, I like, especially with the injuries to Goddard, to Ertz, to Waller. There's almost no way that he's not going to finish top 3, top 4.
Yeah. Something else interesting that I saw is that he is the primary read on over 20% of the plays that the Minnesota Vikings have run, and he was less than 10% in Detroit. So he's now the primary read over twice as often as he was in Detroit. And I'm with you. I don't think I've ever seen a tight end get traded midseason and elevate his fantasy value like this. So Dan, I see you nodding along. I'm guessing that you're in the same camp. TJ Hawkinson, top 3 tight end.
Top 3 tight end. I'm just looking at the list that I have, of the ranks of. It's maybe Pat Freiermuth. I think on a given week might be able to slide into the top 3, but right now, I think it's definitely T.J. Hawkinson and what he's done in it for his career, and just hasn't finished less than 3rd in the team in targets since he's been there. So you got to continue to start him with confidence, and in a really thin position. Man, it's slim picking. So if you have Hawkinson, congratulate yourself. Give yourself a pat on the back because it's ugly out there, as Dave can attest to.
Yeah. What cup did I see you just sip out of there, Andy, as we were talking?
Yeah, that may have been an Iowa cup. That may have been.
Yeah, I was just curious. I'm not sure if that was a plug or not. I'm not sure what kind of endorsement deal you've got with Iowa, but I thought I saw that slip in as we were talking about DJ. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the Jets here and Garrett Wilson. Again, we're splitting hairs trying to figure out who the rookie wide receiver one is, whether it's Wilson or Olave. Let's just appreciate that both of these guys are phenomenal talents. He's obviously the biggest benefactor from the switch to Mike White. But I want to talk about who the other benefactors are. Elijah Moore got into the end zone, but only saw a handful of targets. Corey Davis might be involved now. We know Mike White likes to check down to his running backs. So, Dan, start us off here. Besides Garrett Wilson, who is the biggest benefactor from this change?
So even though that Corey Davis led the wide receiver group in snaps, and he had success with Mike White last year, I'm an Elijah Moore stan right now because, even though he didn't see a huge target share, like I just like what he did with his opportunities. He scored a touchdown. As the weeks are going on, I think we're seeing him get a little bit more involved in this offense. I think he's done pouting. I think the way that this team is heading in a direction of competency, like they actually have a quarterback that can push the ball downfield, I think it only gives more upside for him going forward. And he's still available in a lot of Yahoo and ESPN leagues. So that's the person I think is the most affordable. Garrett Wilson, if someone dropped him, obviously I think he's a must-have, but I doubt it at this point after 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's the best benefactor, but I think Elijah Moore is right behind him because I think I just don't know how I can gauge Corey Davis. Like, I'm not actively starting him. Like, I just feel like there's not enough upside in Corey Davis. He might get, 5 receptions for 45 yards or something, but I don't know. I think the big playability is really with Elijah Moore here. So I'm going to lead him, but I'm also interested in Zonovan Knight. Like, I spent a lot of fab on him this week, and I think that there's an opportunity. If you're a dynasty player, he could be one of the running backs that you start because Breece Hall is going to have some time for recovery. He looked great. Over 100 scrimmage yards, and Mike White likes to dump it down. If Michael Carter isn't all the way healthy, I think Zonovan Knight actually could be a person you might end up flexing over the next several weeks.
Yeah, I'm really torn between Zonovan Knight and Ty Johnson.
Ty Johnson, yeah.
I'm not sure who the guy is going to be there. I mean, they both looked pretty good last week, but this is also just a really good offensive line. And that just goes to show that sometimes an offensive line can make anybody look good, even if it's an undrafted rookie. No disrespect to Zonovan Knight, but he looked way better than I had anticipated playing in that offense. But back to Elijah Moore, you talked about it, and I'm with you. This feels oddly reminiscent to the Brandon Ayuk situation, where as a rookie started off finished the season red hot, and then didn't really know what happened in year 2. I don't know if he was in the doghouse, but he just wasn't getting the looks. He wasn't getting the snaps, and now he's starting to kind of show that promise again. So, Andy, what are your thoughts on Elijah Moore or somebody else who you think is a benefactor here in New York?
Yeah, I will say first of all that the best the best thing about White by far, and it's a pretty low bar to clear, is that he hits all the layup throws that they put in the offense, that should have helped Zach Wilson, right? Like all the simple screens, all the easy stuff. Like White nails those. It's crazy that Wilson couldn't, but like he couldn't hit a screen to save his life last year. Not a lot of actual like action for Elijah Moore in the matchup with the Bears, but he took one of those balls to the house, and it was some phenomenal after the catch ability. Like he's really good. Like there's no question that he's really good. They just need to sustain drives, and I think they now have a quarterback who can do that. I think in all likelihood we're not going to see another game where Elijah Moore only sees like 2 targets, right? Like his volume should go up. I will say that I think the players that actually benefit most from White, and Dan hit on this, they're probably the running backs. Like remember there was a 2-game stretch last year with White at quarterback where Michael Carter was targeted like 23 times. Not all of them checkdowns. A lot of them just like the simple screens that Zach Wilson can't throw for whatever reason. White was nailing, and I think we'll see that both with Knight and Johnson probably in the week ahead. I will say that like all of the work that Donovan Knight did last week, and I thought it was really fun. Like I really like this style. I'm totally a sucker for this style. Like just picking out a guy to run through. I like that. It was the Bears, and it was a version of the Bears defense that has like deliberately gotten worse over the last few weeks. So we should probably pump the brakes a little bit. Like I think Knight is really fun. I don't know that he did anything that James Robinson couldn't do. But I thought it was really fun. Like I love him stylistically. At some point I would like to see him actually try to make people miss.
Yeah, and I think people do have to realize that yesterday's game last week's game should come with a little bit of a grain of salt. This was already one of the worst defenses in the league, and then at the trade deadline, they said, let's get rid of Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn, our 2 best defenders, and then Eddie Jackson blows out his foot. I mean, this was already the worst defense in the league that lost their 3 best defenders. So if there's anything you're taking away from this conversation, it is you can probably start anybody playing against the Bears for the rest of the season. I'm fully expecting Aaron Rodgers to go for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns this weekend. But the last question I have about this game, and Andy, I know you are a big Kirk Cousins fan, so I can't believe I'm even asking this, but who do you prefer this week, Kirk Cousins or Mike White?
I prefer the guy who gets to throw to Justin Jefferson is pretty much what this comes down to. It's close. Like I don't think there's a huge gap between them, but I do think there's I probably shouldn't talk about the range of possibilities for White without acknowledging that the range of possibilities for Kirk Cousins is literally the worst game you've ever seen and a stellar game. So like he's a range of outcomes guy too. But he's also the guy who's throwing to Hawkinson, who's throwing to Jefferson, who's throwing to Thielen. I just trust all the elements of that offense a little bit more, even though Cousins is certainly not having the season that I had anticipated from him. I'm sure I wrote a hype piece at some point in August, and it just has not happened that way. But I'm going to take the guy with better weapons.
I didn't see your hype piece, but I did write a hype piece on Kirk Cousins this offseason, and you were the first person to comment on it and said, finally, somebody putting some respect on Kirk Cousins, and it's been tough so far. But the last thing, you did mention Justin Jefferson here. Are there any concerns? And again, this is probably, I think I know the answer to it, but got to ask for the audience. Any concerns about Sauce Gardner, who is probably going to be shadowing Jefferson in this game?
Yeah, Gardner's really good. And no, I don't have any concerns with Justin Jefferson. Like I would with somebody who is not very clearly one of the 3 or 4 best receivers in the game right now, but I don't have any concerns with Jefferson. I haven't seen any reason to think that they will completely allow an individual corner to eliminate a player from their offense. So no, not really.
And I think early in the season, I think we kind of saw this progression last week with Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson, where I think Kirk Cousins realized you can't cover Justin Jefferson. Even if he looks covered, I can throw the ball up to him and he's going to make a play. Because we saw early in the season when Darius Slay shut him down, and the very next week, Jeff Okudah shut him down, and people were getting a little bit concerned about it. And then last week, the Patriots said, well, we're going to double team Justin Jefferson all game long. And Kirk Cousins said, well, I'm just going to zip balls to him in double coverage. And guess what? Justin Jefferson came down with almost every single catch. So again, I think I knew how you were going to answer this question, Andy, but for the audience, do not be concerned whatsoever about Justin Jefferson this week. But same question to you, Dan. Who do you like this week, Mike White or Kirk Cousins?
It's interesting because as good as Kirk Cousins could be, he's not throwing for a lot of passing yards. He's only gone over 300 passing yards. What less? I can count less on my hand. So it's really about the touchdown spike. And when you have Justin Jefferson there, and we talked about Hawkinson being a red zone threat, I think the upside really is with Kirk is that he's going to throw more touchdown passes in terms of fantasy points. But if you're asking who's going to have the better day, statistically, it actually might be Mike White, only because he's going to have to throw the ball a lot against a Minnesota defense that actually is pretty, you can score points on them. And quarterbacks, I think they're seventh fewest or seventh best for quarterbacks this season. So Mike White could have a good day, but it's kind of hard to get a real gauge of Mike White and what this Jets offense is going to look like, because we've only really seen him this season against the Bears. So this is going to be a true test, man. The Vikings are a real team that's vying for the top spot in the NFC. So it's going to be a good matchup. But I was actually excited to watch the Jets. I know you mentioned it before, Dave. The Jets have been fun, but I'm like, when has it really been fun? Their defense is fun. Zach Wilson's been awful. So maybe we'll actually see a competent Jets team here go up against one of the best.
Well, it was really fun for 5 weeks to just watch Zach Wilson, poop his pants and miss every single wide open receiver. That was fun, just a different type of fun. But maybe I'm just, I don't know. I really hope that I'm not getting over my head here, but I got Mike White slotted in as a back end QB1. He's my 12th overall quarterback this week in my rankings. Might be a little bit overreactionary, but I've got him ahead of Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk Cousins.
Fair.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it last season where he, only played 3 games, but he looked good in those 3 games and then looked good last week. I don't think there's any reason to expect that he can't continue. I mean, obviously they can, we see this often where quarterbacks will have a really good 5 or 6 game stretch and then defenses can adjust. But what we're seeing so far from Mike White is that he's surrounded by a lot of talent and he can hit those easy throws.
Yeah, to Dan's point about the Vikings defense too, like they'll give up a ton of yards. They're weird, right? Like they've taken the ball away. That is what they do well as a defense, but you can move the ball on them just up and down the field at will.
Yeah. Now let's go ahead and talk about another game. And, I put some money down a couple weeks ago that this is going to be the Super Bowl matchup. Got some really good odds on it. We're looking at the Miami Dolphins facing off against the San Francisco 49ers and what's going to be a really, really fun reunion with Michael Daniel, going back to San Francisco, facing off against Kyle Shanahan. Another game that I'm really excited about this week. And let's talk about Tua Tagovailoa a little bit because he has a massive ceiling, but he's also had a few duds this season. So very good San Francisco defense that he's going to be facing off against. Are there any concerns about starting him as your quarterback this week? Andy?
What are you doing here, Dave? You're just trying to make people feel really bad about their best decisions, right? Like Tua has clearly been a home run this year. And I think he's elevated himself to that class of player that you're just, what are you going to do? Play White over Tua? No, you're not going to do that. He's the guy who gets to throw to Tyreek and Jalen Waddle.
So let me throw a very actionable question out there that a lot of people might be faced with. Deshaun Watson or Tua? Who are you taking?
Yeah, so that to me is interesting because I am getting a ton of Deshaun Watson questions, and I would absolutely go Tua in this one. Like to me, Tua is he's not in the Patrick Mahomes tier, but he's in the tier almost like immediately below it, right? Yeah, that is where he belongs. So like Miami's offense has scored 30 points or more in 4 straight games. Tua has 10 TD passes in those games. Again, it's Tyreek, it's Jalen Waddle, and those two are just sort of an unsolvable problem for opposing defenses, no matter who they are. And like, I don't know if Miami is the upper tier offense that we think they are. Kansas City put 44 on San Francisco. Like it's not like it's an unbeatable defense. We're not talking about an all-time defense here. And if Miami is in that class of offense, and I think maybe they are, they're not going to struggle. Like if your biggest worry this week is Tua Tagovailoa, I don't think you really have serious fantasy problems.
And I'm with you as well. Again, sometimes we just have to answer or ask these layup questions to help the audience out because they see a tough defense and they see a not great performance last week. Obviously, that was because they were up so big. He didn't have to play in the second half. But yeah, again, and Dan, I'm not even going to ask you this question because I see you nodding along and I know you agree. You're starting Tua this week if you've got him. But let's talk about the backfield in Miami a little bit. Both of these guys have a fun revenge narrative. It looks like Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem Mostert are both going to be active going back to San Francisco. Dan, it looks like Jeff Wilson has really taken over this backfield. Are you still thinking about starting Raheem Mostert, or is he just kind of a stash at this point?
I think it's a stash. I think this is Jeff Wilson's backfield. He did leave the game with an injury, but it seemed like it wasn't overly serious.
Just cramps. He came
Yeah,
back.
exactly. So, I think that this is going to be a great matchup for Jeff Wilson. We just suggested, Tua might struggle a little bit. San Francisco is an elite defense, but they can give up some yards. So, I think Michael McDaniel's probably had this circled on his calendar for quite some time. And, even though they're traveling across the country, the implied game total is 46.5. So there's going to be some points scored here. I think it's going to be a fun game. And I think this is going to be one in the trenches. While, those receivers do have a lot of yak potential, they're going to have to control the clock here. And I think this is going to be one of those grinded out type games where you're going to see Jeff Wilson probably get, anywhere from 15 to 17 carries. And maybe we'll see Raheem Mostert, siphon a little bit of that work, but I don't think it's going to be to any extent that I would feel any kind of hesitancy in starting Jeff Wilson.
Yeah, agree fully there. I mean, Raheem Mostert was a great story to start the season, 30 years old, finally
we know
staying
who he is. Like we knew this was coming, right? Like
Exactly.
he could only hold the job for so long, whether it be injury or just getting outplayed. And I think he's a great complimentary piece, but I think right now it's proven that Jeff Wilson is the best back there.
Yeah. By about week 3, when you saw what Chase Edmonds was, it was pretty obvious that this team was going to make a move for some sort of running back.
Poor Chase.
This will happen.
I believed in him, man. I had him, and I had more shares than I'd like to admit. Because I just thought it was a great scenario, but he is just not a guy that's set up to be a workhorse back or get any kind of sustainable workload outside of being a complimentary back.
Yeah, but as we saw for years in San Francisco and now again in Miami, Jeff Wilson Jr. is just willing to smash the first guy he sees on a field in the face as hard as he can. That just works well with the offense.
It does.
And, it's happening again in Miami. So I'm with you. Definitely starting Jeff Wilson with confidence and probably just holding on to Raheem Mostert for now and seeing what happens. Now, I hate even talking about this because I have done about 7 shows this week, and I've talked about this on every single show, and I haven't gotten a good answer from anybody. I haven't provided a good answer. I have no idea what to expect here. But, Andy, Elijah Mitchell is out for what's presumed to be the rest of the fantasy season, and now we're looking at Christian McCaffrey with some knee tenderness. So who's the guy? Jordan Mason, Tyrion Davis-Price, who is the guy that we should be counting on in San Francisco, if either of them?
Yeah, the guy I've added is Davis Price. And I don't know where this is going. And we have to go all the way back really to week 2 to find any clues whatsoever, right? So week 2, following the first Mitchell knee injury, it was 18 carries for Jeff Wilson. It was 14 for Davis Price and 4 carries for Deebo Samuel. Davis Price didn't really do a whole lot with those carries. He is not stylistically anything like Elijah Mitchell, right? He doesn't have that sort of shot out of a cannon thing that Mitchell does. Big player, kind of suited for goal line, short yardage work, stuff like that. I don't know that it's going to be particularly exciting, but I think he's the place where I'm placing all my chips.
Yeah, and on the one thing I've said to people is to watch out for a Tevin Coleman elevation from the practice squad before Sunday. I mean, we know Shanahan likes to play weird games with his backfield. This is one that I just don't have any confidence in. If Christian McCaffrey isn't playing, I don't want to start anybody in this backfield because, it's just going to be so tough to predict. Dan, you got any insight on what we might possibly expect out of the San Francisco backfield?
It's hard to trust, man. Shanahan's back to shenanigans, man. Like just doing too much. Way too many running backs in this running back room. As Andy alluded to, you got to go back to week 2. And I think Tyrion Davis-Price got most of those carries when Elijah Mitchell went down. And if you look at Jordan Mason, he's really been active because of a special teams role. So it's hard to really predict whether his carries last week was indicative of really being the most competent backup, or he just has another role and hey, there's an injury, so he's going to get more carries. You also just presented a new development that Tevin Coleman could possibly get elevated. So it's pretty murky here, but as Andy suggested, I think TVP is probably the guy that I would probably trust the most. But yeah, at this point, you're just guessing.
Yeah,
it would be awesome if we saw like 8 or 10 carries from Deebo. Like, I'll take that.
That's actually a really good point. Like, I think maybe you pivot a little bit more in getting Deebo those carries, because he can definitely carry that workload. So yeah, I think that maybe we'll see some scheme differences, but all in all, man, I'm really curious to see how this shakes out because, yeah, I think your guess is as good as any.
Yeah, and that Christian McCaffrey addition has been pretty rough for Debo. I mean, he's had a bad couple of weeks now where he's not
Yeah.
getting those really creative touches out of the backfield. And this is kind of a mind-blowing stat, but if you look, Debo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk are each averaging exactly 13.7 PPR points per game on the season. They are putting up the same exact production. So the question I have, and Dan, you can start us off here, who do you prefer this week, Debo or Ayuk?
I like them both because, Christian McCaffrey hasn't been running too efficiently for the San Francisco 49ers. He's been getting a little banged up. I think they already know that he's not going to be able to carry a 20 carry type of game. So I think that puts more pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo, who's also been playing better. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think, has been a fine stream. I had to do it when Justin Fields went down. He held me down. So I think that you're seeing this San Francisco offense kind of evolve a little bit. And being that they can't maybe rely on the run as much because their backfield's so banged up, I think you can trust Debo and Ayuk. I have more shares of Ayuk, so I'm starting him as my wide receiver 2 in some cases. And in other ones, I think he's a flex option. But, Debo's is a person you're not going to bench. And as Andy already mentioned, the possibility of him getting more carries only elevates his upside. So you're not benching Debo, and I wouldn't bench Brandon Ayuk either.
Yeah, and for me, what it comes down to, if Christian McCaffrey is active, I prefer Ayuk, and if Christian McCaffrey is inactive, then I prefer Debo. Like you alluded to, Debo probably gets some more touches out of the backfield if Christian McCaffrey can't suit up. We got time to talk about one more game, and I'll leave this up to you guys. Would you rather talk about the Chargers at the Raiders or Packers at Bears? I think both have some interesting topics.
But with
Which one do
two
you guys wanna
Bears
talk
fans,
about?
what's the option here? I mean,
I feel like I have to recuse myself from a Bears Packers discussion. I'm sure I can't be objective.
Well, let's do it anyway because I think this is a fun one to talk about. We're going to talk about Bears Packers. And Andy, I'll throw this question to you first. Who do you think we see play first this year, if either at all? Aaron Rodgers or Justin Fields?
Well, Aaron Rodgers already declared himself this week's starter ahead of his head coach even being able to say anything about it. So
Did you see Alan Lazard's comment too?
I suppose it's going to be Aaron Rodgers. My hope with Fields is actually, as a Bears fan and someone who finds themselves now, just kind of hoping that they would put Fields in bubble for a while. And I'm rooting for draft position, which is always fun as a fan. But obviously I don't want to see anything happen to Fields beyond what's already happened to him this year because he's great. I would love it if they would just go into the bye without having played him and let him get fully healthy and maybe give him a shot at Detroit in championship week in fantasy. And, and like, I don't need to see Justin Fields again. I've seen enough. So yeah, I think we're going to get Rodgers at least for a game until I don't know at what point that team is going to be officially eliminated. I eliminated them in my head like 6 weeks ago. There's not a lot of reason for Rodgers to keep playing, except that, he's probably still going to be the quarterback in Green Bay moving forward and additional reps with Watson and anybody else who's going to remain a part of that receiving core are valuable. So it seems pretty clear that it's going to be Rodgers.
Did you see Alan Lazard's quote yesterday when they asked if they thought Aaron Rodgers was going to play? And he said, I think he's still got to renew his ownership. You got to do that twice a year. So yeah, not looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a pretty tough matchup if Aaron Rodgers does play. But Dan, I want to talk about the receivers here, and you talked about them a little bit, Andy. Who do we prefer this week between Alan Lazard and Christian Watson? Because it sure looks like we're seeing a changing of a guard here. Who do you like better this week?
Yeah, I think it's Christian Watson. He's the big play guy now. I think that Alan Lazard has been a dependable target for Aaron Rodgers, but I don't think he has the big play ability like Christian Watson. They're scheming ways for him to get the ball, whether it be screens. He's running corner routes, deep posts. Like they're putting him in positions to win and succeed more from a fantasy perspective to me. So I trust Christian Watson. I'm actually benching Alan Lazard. I have him in a PPR league, and I just can't deal with the 8-9 points. I'd rather go for the spike, which I think upside is certainly going to be Christian Watson.
Yeah, as a Lazard truther, I'm kind of coming to that realization myself. And Andy, I know you were another guy this offseason that was kind of beating the drum for Alan Lazard a little bit. Are you thinking that Christian Watson might be the guy now?
Yeah, I like Lazard and
like him as a wide receiver too. I think like neither of us were saying this guy was going to be great, but
Oh no, I was fully on board with Lazard this year, and I actually still feel like for however long Aaron Rodgers remains a quarterback for that team, even this like unhealthy version of Aaron Rodgers, at some point we're going to see another good week for Allen Lazard. Like that's definitely going to happen. But he does not have the element to his game that forget the 3 touchdown game, forget
Right.
some of the highlight plays from Watson. Just last week, the simple throw from Love, that was like that play. It doesn't have to go for a touchdown, and with almost anybody else catching it, it does not go for a touchdown, right? Like he can do stuff like that. He can take something that probably ought to be a 12-yard gain, and house it. And that's not really in Lazard's bag of tricks, right? Like Lazard needs his quarterback to do most of the work for him. And that is clearly not the case with Watson. Plus Watson is also a guy that Rodgers will just throw it up for, which is awesome to see. Like, and he's 6'5", he can jump through the roof, and he has all the physical traits that you want in a receiver. So except for the hands don't always work, right? But you can get past that. He has home run potential on every target.
Yeah, and I think the 2 plays that really stick out to me over the last few weeks, and you kind of alluded to both of them, were one, the catch and run from Jordan Love last week. I mean, you saw that, and it looked like Jordan Love was just going to get knocked out of bounds, and then he kicked the second gear and just flew past everybody. I don't think there's an angle that the D-backs could have taken where they would have been able to take him down. And then the other one was a couple weeks back. It was a free play, so there was no risk there for Rodgers, but he just chucked it up into the end zone while Christian Watson was blanketed, and he came down with a spectacular contested catch. So, yeah, I was somebody that was fading Watson a little bit this offseason, but he is looking darn good so far. Last question I have, and this might not be specific to this week. If Justin Fields, for whatever reason, doesn't play, I don't think Trevor Siemian is on your radar whatsoever. But if Aaron Rodgers can't play, is Jordan Love a guy that might be someone worth looking at in single QB leagues? What do you think, Dan?
Single QB, I don't know that I'll go that far, but I will say I was impressed by the way he looked. I had the Packers +7 last week, so I was very fortunate that Jordan Love could push the ball downfield and get to that field goal, and also that play with Christian Watson. He throws a tight spiral, man. I think there's been a lot of reports of how he's improved over the course of the season. I'd be looking to, I think there's an option of starting him in Superflex for sure, but yeah, single QB, I don't know that I would do it even for as bad as the Bears defense is.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I mean, he's got some rushing upside, but I think that there's enough quarterbacks that you can feel confident with the guys already out there. Before we log off, though, last question I have for you, Andy, over the last 30-something years now, we've seen Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. Please tell me Jordan Love isn't just next in, a future Hall of Famer for the Green Bay Packers, right? Like, that's not going to happen, right?
There is nothing to this point to suggest that Love is going to be a future Hall of Famer for the Packers. No, we can't. I can't do it. I can't go another 15 years with some absolute sorcerer at quarterback for the Packers. We just can't.
All right. Well, we will wrap up the show on that point. That's all I wanted to hear, Andy. But before we log off here, one more time, Dan, let everyone know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, hit me up on Twitter for as long as it lasts at Dan Titus, and find all my work at Yahoo. Make sure you download the Yahoo app and play their fantasy games, obviously the best in the market. And yeah, find me on Twitter.
Andy, let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, what Dan said about Yahoo, and they can find me on Twitter at Andy Behrens.
And really simple here. We got at Dan Titus, at Andy Behrens, and you can
so
find
creative.
me at Dave Kluge.
No underscores, no flourishes.
Yeah, no numbers, nothing like that. No FF. We are just who we are. Really easy to find us. So be sure to do that. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I will catch you again next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Launchpad. As always, be sure to give us a thumbs up below. That's going to help some other people find this video. If you got anything to add, leave a comment. Be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys so you can see all of the video content that we have here to offer. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.